Alrighty, how's it going, guys? Welcome to this first video, which is going to be about just a basic understanding of what things like electric drums and amp modeling give you. And I'm not going to dive into too much details about the stuff I use. Those will be in later videos. This is just the principles of what they give you, why they're different to traditional instruments, and why you should consider using them, some of the use cases for them. So, couple of caveats. First of all, we normally film stuff that way in the studio. It looks great filming that way, so I apologize for the behind the scenes view here. Secondly, I stayed up all night making this presentation, so the graphics are 100% top notch. I believe production value is really important, so let's get into it. So first of all, I might have lied about staying up all night. Okay, so traditionally speaking, with a band on stage, you have your stage on which you have a series of instruments. Here we've got drums, guitar, keyboards, and a singer. You might have more guitarists, you might not have a keyboard player. You know, alter that to your taste. From those instruments, we go into a mixing stage, which is normally a mixing desk. There's normally a sound engineer, and from there, it goes out to the audience. There's normally a set of speakers, which we tend to call front of house. That's what the audience hears. There's a little bit more to it than that. So usually you have something called foldback, which is, or monitoring. So the musicians can hear themselves playing and singing. And sometimes you'll have another tap off the sound desk to a recording device or to a broadcast stream or to whatever it might be. You don't find that at every gig, but it's possible, even satellite speakers, whatever the case may be. Okay. There's one part of the chain kind of missing here, which is going to be the first thing I chat about. And that is, in order to get these various sources into the sound desk, you need microphones. Now, this for me is one of the first hurdles to overcome with live music. And it's one of the first reasons that electric drums and amp modeling can go a long way. This is because at every gig, you're probably going to get a different microphone put in front of your drum set, in front of your guitar cabinet, even in front of your mouth if you're a singer. Not every company is going to give you the same microphones. This is challenging because different microphones have got different sound characteristics. Some are inferior for the job at hand. Some are superior for the job at hand. But no two microphones are the same. And the second problem is that microphone placement can have an enormous effect on the sound of your instrument. I mean, just in this illustration here, you know, those four microphones will sound very different from one another based on their proximity to the cone, the center of the cone. And the same is true with drums. The proximity to the skin, the angle of the actual microphone, the microphone itself, all of those affect the sound of your drum immensely, the sound that comes out of the speakers. So as a drummer, you don't hear that difference, but the audience will hear that difference across different shows. Now, so we've got it set up here with everything. The first problem is that acoustic drums make quite a lot of noise. I don't know if you've ever been next to an acoustic drum kit where someone's bashing it out, but it's something quite, yeah, it's loud. So loud, in fact, that with smaller venues, and I'm going to classify smaller here as in venues that sort of have under 150 people, what tends to happen is that the sound engineer will not be putting certain drums or elements of certain drums into the speakers. Now, what do I mean by that? So when you have a set of overheads hooked up on a drum set, so they're there to mic up the cymbals, mic up the overall sound of the drum kit. If that drum kit's already loud in the venue that it's in, the sound engineer won't be turning up the drum kit. They won't be turning up those microphones because the drums are already loud enough for the venue. In fact, there's a problem there because you have to bring everything else up to the level of the drums, if not louder than the drums. So if you're in a small venue and you've got a drummer hitting an acoustic drum kit hard, then the sound engineer has to make the singer's voice louder than that drum kit for the singer's voice to be audible. Now, sometimes that isn't as feasible as just turning a fader up, because there's other factors. There's feedback. If you turn any microphone up loud enough in an environment, you get a loop where sound comes out of the speakers and goes back into the microphone, out of the speakers back into the microphone. And that's where you hear that woo sound that you might have heard when someone's setting up a sound system. And as soon as you start getting feedback, the only option for a sound engineer is to compromise the audio to eliminate the feedback. So either you start EQing the mains, so you start pulling frequencies out of the main speakers to attack that feedback, or you start EQing the microphone itself, which changes the characteristic of the singer's voice through the microphone, or you start pulling the singer down, or you start making other compromises like making the drummer play softer, maybe taping up the skins, and I'm going to get into why that's a bad idea just now. But this problem isn't only limited to the drums with this kind of setup. So the drums make a lot of racket, a guitar stack, a cab, even a tube, like a 5-watt tube amp, will make a stuff load of noise. And again, so much noise that the sound engineer won't necessarily be putting that instrument through the main speakers as much as they should be. Now, it's not inherently a bad thing that the sound engineer isn't putting guitar in the mains in the front of house, because sometimes it's nice to have sounds coming from different sources, especially if you've got low quality speakers. Some speakers I've worked with, they're great for things like conferences where all you've got is a voice coming out of a speaker. But as soon as you have any complicated frequencies playing on top of each other, like an acoustic guitar and a singer, it just starts to sound like a muddy mess. So sometimes it can work to your advantage, but realistically, if you're playing shows where the speakers themselves cannot reproduce sound and multiple sounds at once and make them sound nice, you've got other problems, to be perfectly frank. And yet another problem with this setup is those aren't the only sources of like loud volumes on a stage. The foldback also creates, the monitoring for the musicians also creates quite a lot of volume. This is because on the stage, if you're a singer and you've got a drummer 2 meters behind you, you need to have that voice really loud in the speaker in front of you so that you can hear your own voice, or else you can't sing. So with these elements on a stage, and again, this is limited to reasonably small stages where someone hitting an acoustic drum kit is already loud in the venue. So this doesn't apply to things like outdoor stages or massive venues, rooms that sort of have got high ceilings and are well acoustically designed and sort of seat over 200 people. This won't be as much of a factor. But certainly for restaurants, really small clubs, bars especially, these are always factors. And the reality is you're always compromising on the audio at some point, and usually you're compromising when the audio that goes to the audience. You're not putting cymbals in the speakers because they're already too loud on the stage. You are maybe cutting some lows out of the singer's voice because you're getting lows from the back of the monitors. It ends up being, you end up and I've been a sound engineer in this sort of instance loads of times, where you're balancing things more than refining things. And if you're doing that, it's the first step of someone not being happy. You won't be happy, or the audience won't get the best experience, or the musicians on stage will compromise. But usually you're compromising on something. You're not making everything as good as it can be, because it's all interrelated. It all affects the other thing. Okay, so moving on from this. So the first option you have is you can, for instance, turn down the guitar amps or stacks on stage, and you can ask the drummer to hit softer, or you can tape up the skins, or you can, I've even seen people put tape underneath the cymbals. They stuff the kick drum with pillows. So these, in my opinion, and I am a drummer as well, these are awful compromises. You're taking an instrument that sounds good, be it, a guitar cabinet or a drum kit, and you're compromising the audio integrity of that thing to try and fix the sound issue. Now, as soon as you start doing that, you are making the experience worse for the listener. So this brings us to a word called timbre or timbre if you are from the English-speaking Americas. And this word, it means the character or quality of a musical sound as distinct from its pitch and intensity. And for us, intensity is a very important part of this definition. So what this means is that every sound has got a unique quality at its specific pitch and intensity. Now, what that means is that I can say whisper. I can record myself whispering, and I can record myself screaming. And I can adjust those and make them the same volume. And if I played them back to you, the screaming would sound more intense than the whispering. Even though they're the same volume, they've got a different characteristic to them. The whispering sounds more sort of intimate, and it's got less frequencies in it, and it's got a different timbre to the screaming, which is pushed. It's got a different sound characteristic altogether. Even though it's the same instrument of voice, it's got a different timbre at different intensities. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to play for you 3 snare samples. So these are all samples of a snare. It's being hit sort of quite softly, medium, and then being whacked. But all the samples are at the same volume. So let's check them out. Now you can hear the third sample there sounds a hell of a lot louder than the previous 2. Even though those are exactly the same volume, I went in and I recorded them and I made sure that they've come out at the same volume. You can hear that third one has got a lot more sort of, you can hear the attack on the snare more. You can really feel that instrument is being whacked hard. And for some genres of music, you need that timbre. It's something that defines the music. So like, rock music, I'm just going to use a song as an example. The Best of You by Foo Fighters. If Dave Grohl wasn't reaching for those notes with his voice, and if Taylor Hawkins wasn't smacking the drums, that song wouldn't deliver the intensity that it does. But it does deliver that intensity because those drums are being really milked. It's rock and roll. You've got to hit the drums. The voice is reaching for the notes. The guitar strings aren't being played at like 50% intensity. They're being dug into a little bit. And that's what gives a lot of music that sort of power. It's the various timbres coming together to make it sound more powerful. So compromising on the intensity of the instruments. So getting your drummer to hit softer. There are drummers that do hit too hard, I will say that, but they are few and far between. Getting your drummers to hit softer. Turning down a guitar cab is also, especially if you're doing anything with sort of overdrive or where you want the amp to break up a bit, starts to affect the sound quality of the amp. The same thing, a guitar cab is usually designed to run sort of between, I'd say, 7 and 10 when it comes to volume. It's different with bass guitars, with bass amps, because you need headroom with a bass amp. But big amps, they're designed to run, or most amps are designed to run reasonably hot, and you really want the wood shaking. You want that thing. It needs to be on. It needs to be running. And if you look at major bands, AC/DC come to mind. I mean, they travel with a full-time guitar tech. His job is literally repairing. An amp tech. His job is literally repairing amplifiers after every single show, because they have all their amps cranked and they blow components of amps all the time. I'm not recommending you go and do that unless you've got AC/DC kind of money, but the case stands. All the major shows, they play with amps and they turn them up loud and they mic up the loud amp. But I don't. So this leads me back to, I don't think it's a solution to turn down amplifiers and to mute drums or to get drummers to play softly, because again, you're compromising the audio quality of those instruments. So when you come to a gig with an acoustic set of drums and a half stack, or even sort of a 100 watt guitar amp, if you put those things on the stage and you hit the drums, you don't mute anything on the drums, as in put pillows in the skins and duvets, and you play the drums the way you're supposed to play the drums. You plug in the guitar amp and you turn it up to a volume where you can hear it starting to really, give you the sort of power you need, and you play it. And if you're in the venue and you're doing those two things, and without touching anything else, those two things are already loud or too loud, then you're going to be compromising on your audio from that moment forward. You're going to be compromising for the musicians, you're going to be compromising for the sound engineer, and you're going to be compromising for the audience. So let's just look at some of the pros and cons briefly. Okay, so some of the cons, let's start with those first, and I'm going to come back to these, so don't worry, is that electric drums specifically are harder to play, and amp modeling things are harder to play with because you don't have that instant feedback from the thing in your face. They're more expensive. That's another argument that's made. Like I said, you don't get acoustic feedback. You can be playing the drums, playing an electric set of drums, and you're not getting the acoustic feedback, especially the physioacoustic feedback. By that I mean low frequencies. When you hit a kick drum, it creates low frequencies which are omnidirectional. So you also feel the kick drum as much as you hear a kick drum. And another argument is that they sound worse. And this is especially true. This is an argument made by a lot of audiophiles. Okay. And then we'll just go through the pros quickly. So the pros is that you got no stage bleed. These things don't make a noise, so they're not bleeding out like volume everywhere. You get this exactly the same sound at every gig you play, because you just literally take cables, plug them in, they go to the sound desk, and you know for a fact that you are giving the sound engineer at every gig, every venue, you're giving them exactly the same source sound. There's no microphone ambiguity, there's no mic placement ambiguity, there's no, I've changed the settings on my amp a little bit. It's exactly the same sound every gig. You can practice anywhere. With electric drums especially, this is true. If you live in a block of flats, you can practice electric drums at 11 o'clock at night. If you use amp modeling software, you can literally practice in your bedroom with headphones on. They can be more portable. Again, I'm going to take you through my rig in the next video, for my drum rig and my electric guitar rig, and we can compare the portability of that. But I'm yet to find an acoustic drummer who's got a great sounding acoustic drum kit that is as portable as the electric drum kit I'm going to show you. Sound engineers will love you. This is perhaps more valuable than you realize. Having been a sound engineer, when a band turns up and they've got their stuff waxed, like they just plug this in, turn it up, it sounds great, I cannot tell you how much easier that makes your job, especially for the opening 3 or 4 songs, because a lot of gigs you don't have the luxury of a proper sound check. And by a proper sound check, I mean I want the drummer to sit there and hit the kick drum for at least a minute while I really tune the kick drum. Most of the time it's just gain it properly, put faders up, put the wedges to an acceptable level, and during the first couple songs at least, you're re-EQing and trying to find the balance of everything. So sound engineers, if you arrive and you've got everything and it sounds great out the box just with some cables, they'll be your best friends. Singers and frontmen will also appreciate you, because they're normally the ones who are on the receiving end of all the problems that drums that are too loud and guitarists that are too loud create. They struggle to hear themselves on stage. It's quite valid in small venues because your ears almost start clipping. You've got this wall of volume and it's hard to distinguish one thing against another. And believe me, I've gotten more gigs out of having happy singers than I have out of being an amazing drummer, because I'm not a great drummer. I'm okay. But the fact that I can turn up with a drum kit that makes the singer's life easier is more valuable than you realize if you're looking for gigs. You can change kit sounds. This extends to amplifiers. The one band that I play in, for instance, my guitar rig, which I will take you through, in the verse, I've sort of got an orange amp, maybe with some sort of overdrive in front of it. And then in the chorus, I've got a Marshall amp with a different overdrive and different delays on those different amplifiers. And at the click of a button, it's like someone unplugging your guitar from one pedal board chain, amplifier chain, and microphone place, and plugging it into a completely different pedal board chain, amplifier chain, microphone position. So the flexibility for you as a musician to have those different things is, I would say, unparalleled. To replicate that in hardware, like to have different amplifiers and have things that switch your guitar to different amplifiers, you have to be a major act for that to work practically. And the other one is you can have exotic instruments on tap. I do this quite a lot, especially with drums. If I just need like a specific percussion sound for a song, I can just map it to a pad and then I've got it for that song. And the way I've set myself up is I can even load samples on. So if it's something that I've sampled myself, if I need that sample, I just load it onto a pad and off we go. Okay, so let's come back to the cons here. First of all, let's just look at this. Maybe I haven't mentioned a pro or a con. I apologize if I left them off. I'm not trying to do this to sway you in favor. I'm literally just doing this as a practicality example. You can see already there's quite a lot of pros with just these things at face value. And I'm going to take you through why I think some of these cons are not valid. Okay, so let's start with the harder to play. When this comes to guitar, I think it's almost nonsense. You're playing the guitar. Yes, you do play to an amplifier, but I'm yet to see a really, really good guitarist struggle to play their guitar through different setups. And the good guitarists I do know, you can give them a very cheap guitar and a very average amplifier, and they will sound good. It's in the fingers, guitar. There's make no mistake about that. If you give John Mayer a guitar and you give me a guitar, he will sound better playing that same guitar. Even though it might be harder to play, it's in the fingers. With electric drums, people say it's harder to play. I disagree. I think it's different. I think there's different nuances to learn and there's different things you have to adapt to, but I don't think it's harder. I think you're just used to the one. It's like going from playing acoustic guitar to playing electric guitar. It's different. The strings feel different. The body of the guitar is different. Sometimes the neck is different because, it might be a different construction for acoustic guitar, but I don't think it's harder to play. I think people sit down behind an electric drum kit and it's not familiar and that puts them off and they can't handle that. I've been playing electric drums pretty much exclusively now for the past 5 years. And I now find it easier to play an electric drum kit than I do an acoustic drum kit. I sat down an acoustic drum kit the other day and I could not believe how big the drums are. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'm used to playing, my toms are SPD SX pads. They're literally sort of that size. And then I sit down and there's a 12 or 14 inch tom in front of me and I'm like, that thing is absolutely monstrous. It's like I've got to move my hands how far to hit the toms. So for me, harder to play isn't necessarily, I don't think it's a valid excuse. I think if you invested the same amount of time into electric drums as you have into acoustic drums, you would be in my position where both are the same to play. They're just different. You just adjust your sort of nuances a little bit depending on which one you're playing. But harder is definitely not the right word. More expensive. This is another one I get hit with. When I suggest to people, especially churches, that they should move across to electric drums, and they say, how much are we looking to spend? And I spec a good electric drum kit. Their eyes widen. And then I'm like, yeah, but think about it. If you bought a decent set of acoustic shells for acoustic drums, you bought a decent set of cymbals, you had to buy a good set of microphones, you probably had to upgrade your infrastructure. And by that, I mean, if you have to, you can whittle down an electric drum set to 2 outputs, even 1 output. You could mono out an electric drum set. That's 1 audio cable, 1 channel on a sound disc. Acoustic drums, usually mic'd up, kick and snare usually isn't enough. You have to mic up the toms. So you've normally had to buy a bigger snake, possibly a bigger sound desk, plus all the monitoring and fallback solutions that you need to now match that drum kit's volume. By that I mean you probably got more wedges. Maybe you had to get a desk with more aux sends. There's a bunch of things you had to do to be able to accommodate that drum kit, infrastructure-wise. Even if we eliminate that, the cost of the drums, the shells of the drums, the cymbals, the microphones, and again, with a lot of smaller venues, the treatment of, a lot of people put their drummer behind a plexiglass cage or something like that. You got to put that cost in as well. Add up the cost of all of those things, and then compare that to the price of a decent second-hand electric drum kit. I think you would struggle to say that acoustic drums are more expensive at that point. You replace skins a hell of a lot more often on it. Well, you should on an acoustic drum kit. I personally, I've built up an acoustic drum kit and I've got rid of most of it, and I've bought electric drum components, and I can tell you that, especially when you factor in the microphones, the electric drums end up being the same price for a really nice set of electric drums. No acoustic feedback. This is a con that I can't, we can't fix it unless you start bringing your own speaker to just give yourself a little bit of volume. But I don't think that's very practical. So I will agree with you. That is one thing that these things can't give you. They don't make a noise themselves. They rely on being amplified to make a noise. 100%, that's a complete difference. But again, when we look at the pro list, that means you can practice anywhere without pissing off your neighbors or your family or your wife or your husband. Those things are important too. And my favorite one is that they sound worse. Now, this is probably going to be where a lot of you comment, if anyone's watching this, where you tell me that, I've heard, my amplifier versus this amp modeling stuff. Cool. Your amp sounds great. I'll give you that. Go to a gig where there's an average sound engineer with an average microphone who mics up your guitar and doesn't put the mic in the right place, and tell me if that amplifier sounds better than the amp modeling where it's just a cable that goes to the sound desk and is turned up. And by the same token, come with your 150 watt, 200 watt half stack and turn the volume down to 2, and again, mic it up quickly and possibly incorrectly in terms of placement and mic choice. And I'll bring my modeling solution, which I know sounds exactly the same in every environment, and we'll compare which of the two sound better. Even not better, they might even sound the same, but there's a whole bunch of other pros that I'm giving the sound engineer and the audience that your real amplifier isn't. Now, I'm not saying that real amplifiers don't have a place. It's very important you guys understand this. If I go into a studio, I want to have a real amplifier mic'd up. Ironically, I also want to send a dry split of the guitar to the computer to reamp it later. But given a choice, I would 100% have a real amplifier set up with nice microphones and spend my time placing them to get the sound just right. And likewise, if I was doing a stadium tour and I had the budget and the time to build an ISO cab and to put a mic in a specific place in the ISO cab and to play with different speakers and find the best sound, yes. But I doubt most of you watching this are in those positions. And if you are, congratulations, because you are the very tip of the iceberg of live performing, and you probably know more than me about sonic characteristics of instruments already. So in that case, congratulations, and I don't know why you're watching this. The same applies to drums. I've seen it myself, I've heard it myself. A very good drummer playing a very good drum kit that's mic'd up poorly, or mic'd up, but the sound quality is being compromised because of the room that they are in. That drum kit doesn't sound very good. And I say this with respect to drummers because, like I said, there's guys who are much better drummers than me, but their kits sound worse than mine. And that's not because they're a worse drummer or because they're doing something wrong in terms of drumming. It's because that is the wrong application of, you should be using electric drums for that application. The technology's there now. It sounds great. Electric drums, one of my personal favorite things is when I turn up to a gig and I put down my electric drum kit or my little guitar setup, and there's normally someone who comes along and has a look and gives me a kind of quizzical like, I'm not sure about that. And then we play, and afterwards those same people will come to me and say, those drums sounded flippin' excellent, or that guitar of yours sounds incredible. And it's one of my favorite things to see that change, because if I just tell them, they don't believe me. But when they hear it, then they tweak. They're like, oh my gosh, that thing does sound great. And like I said, if we go into a small venue, let's say a bar, sort of less than 100 square meters, you play your drum kit and your half stack, and I'll bring an electric drum kit and the amp modeling stuff, and we'll play a whole gig. I guarantee you'll get more clarity out of the electric drums and the amp modeling stuff. You'll have less audio problems, and the mix, as in the sound that the audience hears, will probably be better from the electronic outputs. So I don't think that sounds worse is actually applicable to the use case that we're talking about. In a studio, absolutely. I don't want to record an electric drum kit samples and put that onto an album, 100%. And I don't want to record amp modeling stuff. Although ironically, I probably will reamp and blend that in anyway. But my first choice for those situations or for a massive stage would always be acoustic drums and an amplifier turned up loud and mic'd up well. But like I said, it's time to start thinking, are you in those positions? If so, well done. Carry on doing what you're doing. If you're not in those positions, you can adjust yourself and you can make these things more practical for you. You can sound better at gigs. It can be more practical for you in terms of setup, takedown times. You can have happier singers or other band members, and you can have happier sound engineers. And in my opinion, all of those things versus a little bit of initial discomfort, I think it's a win. Because if you're an electric drum, if you're the drummer in a band, let's say, and you've played acoustic drums your whole life, right? And you now are going to transition to electric drums. The only person who loses in that equation is you. You are the only person who has any discomfort. It's harder for you initially. I get that, because you have to change, you have to adapt to this new tool that you're using. I completely get that. But everyone else wins. The audience wins, the sound engineer wins, the rest of your band wins. The venue owners probably win because there's less noise complaints. Everyone else in the chain wins for you to compromise a little bit. And like I said, after a while, it's not even a compromise, because as you get used to that, an electric drum set, it becomes a normal. It's not that it's worse, it's different. And when you have finished adapting, you're now, you're playing the drums again, and everyone else has won. The same with the amp modeling. You've got less to carry to gigs. You've got less to worry about in terms of, is the amp right? How does my guitar sound out front? Blah, 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 blah. Your guitar is going to sound great at every gig. And again, when I show you my rig, you can hear what it sounds like out the box and jump to your own conclusions. And on guitar, you're still playing an electric guitar. It's not a world of difference for you. I think the fact that everyone else wins in those equations, I think, and I mean this respectfully, but I think you're being a little bit selfish if you're not willing to just learn a new tool to the benefit of everybody else. Call me crazy. And then the final thing I want to talk about is that this adaptation already exists, and it's not with drummers and it's not with guitarists. It's with keyboard players, piano players. It's impractical to lug a piano to every gig. They're heavy. They're a mission to mic up. Keyboards, on the other hand, very easy to take to different gigs. You click of a button, you can have a different sound, and you have the same sound at every gig because it's just a line out. Now, yes, a keyboard isn't as nice to play as a piano. I play keys as well, not very well, but it's very nice to sit behind a piano and play it. And especially if you play a non-weighted keyboard, it's a very different experience. But the practicalities of playing that instrument in the venues that you're looking at versus lugging a piano and the complexities that go with that, keyboard players changed ages ago. And if anything, it benefited them because the investment into that technology from the users meant more investment in technology from the manufacturers. So now, I can't remember the last time I saw a live piano, unless it's someone like Elton John or Alicia Keys. And even some artists, they have, it looks like a piano, as in it's maybe a grand piano frame, but it's not a grand piano, it's a weighted keyboard inside there. And if that's not an indicator of the fact that you can adapt and improve the quality for everyone, then I don't know what else is. Okay, so thank you very much for checking this out. I've never made a video like this before. I've obviously spoken to people face to face about this sort of thing, but it's a different experience putting it online. And like I said, I will be taking you through my electric drum setup and my electric guitar setup. And I hope to do some more videos, especially around digital desks and monitoring, in-ear monitoring specifically. And another video also on using a click track live, MIDI switching live, different solutions for those things, the benefits and in some cases, the things that they can't do and the problems that they give you. I'll go through all of those and I'm going to try to keep it as objective as possible. So if this is something that helped you, please, if I just put this online and a few people watch it and no one says anything, I don't know whether you like it or not. I'm not making these videos to be entertaining. I'm not making these videos for any sort of revenue. I'm making these to improve the quality of live performances and to help people learn new tools to improve live music. That's my objective with this. If you would like to contact me and have me consult on what I think a good solution for you for your particular set of problems is, I'm very happy to do that, and it won't come with a cost. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.